What do you do when you've got to deliver really bad news to the kids?
You can't preface this with really bad news.
It was bad news.
For who?
Well, for her. I mean, it's not catastrophic news, but she felt like you're interrupting my intro here. What do you do when you've got to deliver really bad news to the kids? And what about when one of your children is at war with somebody else's child? How do you resolve the conflict? Hello, and thank you so much for joining us on the Happy Families podcast, real parenting solutions every day on Australia's most downloaded parenting podcast. We are Justin and Kylie Coulson. May I share my story?
Go for it.
Okay, so for those of you who are new to the pod, every Friday on the Happy Families podcast, we reflect on the week that was. We call this episode, I'll Do Better Tomorrow. Why? Well, because every parent wants to be intentional. Every parent wants to do better tomorrow. By examining it, by putting ourselves under the microscope, we get to have a look at what we're doing right and wrong and hopefully help you and us to do it better tomorrow.
Well, I'm trying to work out what this really bad news is.
Here's the bad news. Earlier this week, I think it was on Tuesday afternoon, you and I were recording a podcast and we looked at the time and realised that it had gotten away from us. We were not going to get to school in time to pick up our grade 10 daughter. She attends school about a 30 to 40 minute walk from our home, and I had to message her and give her the really bad news.
What was the really bad news?
You're going to have to walk home. We're recording podcasts. And I thought very seriously about how I did it because from time to time, especially, I mean, it was a hot day. It's muggy because Cyclone Alfred and all of the rain and all that sort of stuff. Super hot, super gross. And I just thought, if I was going to get this bad news, how would I want it to be framed? So I sent the following text message to our sometimes reactive, nearly 15-year-old daughter. And this is what I said. My sweet Lily.
Oh.
My sweet Lily. Do you like that? You didn't know that.
Sweet talking.
Didn't know that was coming. My sweet Lily, sorry to do this to you, but Mum and I are recording podcasts and have to ask you to please walk home. I know it's hot. I wish we could help. Take your time, and we'll see you when we see you. If we finish early, we will call you to see if you need a ride. Love you, Lily. Dad. And guess what? What? She responded with a love heart, and that was it.
That's because she was raging so much she couldn't respond with anything else.
If she was raging, she would have texted or she would have called or she would have been upset at something. She didn't leave me on red. She sent me a love heart because she understood the tone. She understood, and I'm saying this with fun, but really, what we say matters a lot less than how we say it. And no matter what sort of news we're delivering to our children, the way we say it makes a huge difference in the way that they interpret it, the way they respond to it, and what it does to our relationship.
Well, it's a good thing you sent it. I would have just said, hey, kiddo, you're on your own.
You got to walk.
See you when you get here.
And you know what? She'd probably be fine even if that happened, although she would feel pretty jaded and upset at her mum. I guess the main thing that I'm highlighting here is when we're considerate, of others, or show that if we could help, we would, it demonstrates understanding, it shows empathy, and people are much more responsive to it. That, Mrs. Happy Families, is my I'll Do Better Tomorrow. The message we send matters, and the way we send it matters even more.
Impressive.
Okay, so let's talk about how you have gotten through this week. What have you learnt? What have you done right from a parenting perspective? Or what do you wish you could do again?
So our 10-year-old Emily is homeschooled, but attends various extracurricular activities that enable her to have social interactions with other kids.
Yeah, she's in a bunch of classes and things like that, yeah.
And in one particular class, there is a child who she has clashed with from day one. And it's got to...
And we're up to date like 750 or something like that. It's been more than a couple of years.
Yeah, it's really, really challenging. And it occurred to me that in all of our efforts to teach our kids how to work through challenges, she's actually missed the memo on this one, or we've missed the memo. We haven't shared and taught her a really, really important skill. So I asked her if she was aware of the vicious circle. And she said, what's the vicious circle? And I said, I might need to talk to you about that. So I waited till we were really soft. She came into my room one morning last week and wanted to have some snuggles after wake up. And I said, do you think we could talk about the vicious circle right now? And she said, yeah, sure, Mum. So I said, I'm going to need some pen and paper. So she raced off and she grabbed some pen and paper. And I said, we've been having a really hard time with John, haven't we? And she said, yeah, it's been really hard. I don't like him at all. And I said, I know. Can you tell me what it is about John that makes you so upset? She said, well, whenever I'm participating in class, he always just makes really rude comments to me. I said, comments like what? And she said, he tells me that no one asked me whenever I say something. He says, who cares? And he tells me that I'm a know-it-all every time. And I said, how does that make you feel? And she said, it just makes me really sad, Mum. And then it makes me feel angry.
It's really problematic behaviour.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really concerning.
And I said to her, when you feel sad and angry, I said, what does that make you do? And she said, well, it means that I usually will say rude things back to him. And I said, oh, can you tell me some of the things that you might say when you're feeling angry and hurt? And she'd said, I'd rather be a know-it-all than be like you. And I said,
I'm sure that some parents are going, go girl, go girl. But is that okay?
So anyway, I then asked her, I said, when you say things like that to John, I said, how do you think that leaves him feeling? And she said, Mum, he just laughs at me. And then he tells all of his friends more rude stuff about me. And he says more unkind things about me. And I said, I know how that feels. I said, often when people laugh when things aren't supposed to be funny, it's actually a cover up to what they're really feeling. I said, if he wasn't laughing, what do you think he'd be feeling? And she said, he'd probably be really sad. And then she paused for a second and she looked at me and she said, I think he'd feel injured. The clarity of thought with this kid.
Yeah, great word.
Oh my goodness.
Great word.
And I looked at her and I said, and when he feels injured, what does he do? And she said, well, then he says mean things to me again. And I said to her, I had drawn this in a circle. And so at each part, there's four parts to the circle. And so I filled in the boxes for her so she could actually see it. And once we'd completed the circle and we were back to John saying mean things to her, I did a big flurry of scribble in the middle. And I said, can you see how we're in this big, yucky, vicious circle and we can't get out of it? She said, yeah, I can.
I want to jump in really quickly here. There would be the temptation for some people listening to think, oh, hang on, now you're just blaming your daughter for his bad behaviour. But that's not what's going on here. This is about ownership and accountability for the part that you play in a conflict. And if you try to work out where it started, you've got to go back 2.5, 3 years to when we moved to the Sunshine Coast and she ended up in this boy John's class. John is an alias, of course, it's a pseudonym. And we'll never know. We'll never actually know where it began. What we know, though, is that over the last 2 to 3 years, these kids have fed off each other. And that's the real key here. This is not about absolving someone of responsibility. Rather, it's about helping all parties. I mean, John's really got to be part of this conversation as well if we're going to be super effective. But all parties need to understand that if there is a conflict, they're each making some form of contribution to it. Hard truth, but reality.
So we sat there and I said to her, what would we need to do to actually break this circle? How do we break this cycle that we're in? Because every time you see each other, you are triggered by his response to something that you've said, which then means that you're unkind back and we just keep going round and round. And I said, so for me, I can only see 2 places where we get to break this. I said, either we decide that when John says something unkind, we're just going to ignore it because we know it's not truth. And therefore we can alleviate ourselves from feeling sad and angry. I said, but that's really tricky because when they say things like that, it really hurts, doesn't it? And she said, yeah. I said, so the next thing is, can we stop it once, even though we do feel that, even though we do feel hurt and we do feel sad, can we stop it there by not adding to the conflict? And what would that do to the relationship over time? Do you think that he might just lose steam when there's no longer any response? And it was just, I was so proud of her. She's 10. But to be able to sit there in that place and, number one, feel heard and understood, but number two, to have the consciousness and the perspective to recognize that her words matter too, was really powerful. And so the next step now is, how do we involve the other child in this conversation?
I'd love to know.
Because this is where the real learning can happen for both children as they come to recognize and see each other's perspective. She's been able to take a step back and recognize that her efforts are hurting him. And so now we have this opportunity down the track to actually help him to recognize the same. The challenge, as you would be aware of, is that we can only change us. In any given moment in time, we only have control over us. So in spite of all of our efforts to help the other child come to the party with this, we actually don't get a say in that at all. And there'll be plenty of times in life where you won't even have the opportunity to have that kind of dialogue with someone. So helping your children to work out how they personally can stop that cycle is such an important skill for their well-being.
If anybody would like more information about that particular cycle, I mean, we haven't been through it with our kids for ages because, except for Emily, they all know it and can recite it back to us, and they roll their eyes when we do it, but they copped it, that's the wrong word, but they experienced that empathy and that paradigm shift several times when they were younger and having lots of fights with one another. It's available in my book, 10 Things Every Parent Needs to Know, and it's usually in the context of sibling rivalry, but I love what you've done there. So powerful, so helpful, and obviously it really shifted the way she sees him and their relationship and her attendance and participation in that class.
I don't think this is over. I think we've got a long way to go before she's going to be able to work through this, but it's a really powerful start.
Well, what's the take-home message in a nutshell?
It takes two to tango. And it's a hard truth at times because we want to blame the other person for the hurt that we're experiencing, but you can't have a conflict with one person. We'd call that an internal battle, but that in order for there to be injured feelings between two parties, it takes two people.
Right, if it's ongoing. Of course, bullying is a different matter entirely, but we're talking about this thing where one person is feeding stuff to the other and it's being fed right back. Really interesting conversation, really helpful and hopeful, I'm sure, for a lot of parents who are dealing with this sort of stuff. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon for Bridge Media. We hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be back tomorrow with a conversation with Lenore Skenazy, the world's worst mum, on the Happy Families podcast. We'll find out more about that tomorrow for your weekend listening. More information and more resources, though, to make your family happier. You'll find them at happyfamilies.com.au.